Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast. I'm Tyler.
I'm Jesse.
And I'm Eli.
And boys, we return after, I think, a 3-month hiatus. I think we last spoke before Thanksgiving. Is that
It's
right?
been a minute.
It's been a long time.
It has been. Although we haven't been totally off the airwaves. We have all made appearances on the Orioles Family Feud competition that's going on right now.
It's been super fun.
Yeah.
I've very, very genuinely enjoyed that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jess.
It is. I was just gonna say it is really fun. I've liked it a lot. I will say that might be a partial explanation as to why we haven't recorded. Maybe if we weren't doing that, maybe we would have recorded in that time. I don't know. But we're 2-1, so I'm happy about that. I feel like we've been doing a good job. I'm proud of you guys, and
thank you.
I think we're doing good.
Hey, Jess, we're proud of you.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're undefeated, technically.
That's
Yeah,
true.
I mean technically, but
Tyler and I took the L last time.
right. But we're a team, we're a team. So
Well, I guess we should inform the audience if they somehow have not seen this, but Give That Fan a Contract is another Orioles podcast, sports podcast.
Give that fan a podcast.
A podcast. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Give That Fan a podcast.
Yeah.
It's a play on Give the Fan a Contract, which
Right.
That's how I got confused. That's what they're doing there. But yeah, it's another podcast that hosted by a couple of local guys, and they're conducting a big tournament of Orioles podcasts. And the questions are really fun if you watch Family Feud and enjoy that. This is kind of a similar thing, but Orioles adjacent. And so the questions are sometimes fact-based, sometimes they're more vibes-based. So it's a good time. So check it out. Give That Fan a Podcast on Twitter, and you'll figure it out. Just look it up.
Yeah.
But
And to give it to Ryan specifically, Ryan Blake in particular was the one who sent out all these questions, coordinated the whole thing. So shout out to Ryan as well. It's been super fun.
And as we're recording today, I think we are technically in the semifinals. We're in the losers bracket side of the semifinals. We were in the winners bracket side. We're still waiting on getting that semifinal scheduled. But if we win, we'll go into the final and see how it goes. But either way, it's been a good showing. 2-1, like Jesse said. So we can't have anything worse than a 500 record. So that's pretty cool.
It's true.
I never even thought about that. And if we make the championship too, that's worthy of a lot of celebration, even if we, don't win the championship. So
absolutely. There are moral victories in that competition.
For sure. Eli told me this was a possibility, but I'd be really excited to do it with both of you guys,
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that happens.
Yeah, depending upon the matchup, all three of us maybe, and scheduling abilities, all three of us may appear at the same time. So far, it's only been two of us. Each iteration of the two of us has gotten on there. So
right, each duo, cool.
Yeah. Anyway, today's episode of the Warehouse Podcast, we're going to basically do kind of an off-season in review. Obviously, we haven't been around for a couple months here, and no individual move that's happened so far has been big enough for us to push all of the things aside in our schedules, come together for a podcast. And I guess that kind of is an indication of what the vibe is going to be like on the show tonight.
I will say that's a little bit of an indictment of the Orioles off season, and how it's come together.
Well, I was also just going to say, nothing big enough has really happened.
There's no number 2.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I just completely.
That's okay. But yeah, it's not been the most exciting off season, but I think in general the vibe. I'm saying vibe too many times as well. I've noticed that already, so we're gonna try to not say vibe anymore.
Hey, we're in mid-season form right now.
I was gonna also in fairness too, the off season isn't fully complete, so. Nonetheless, though, I think there's enough
some time to hit the gym,
Right? Yeah, I think there's enough reason for a little bit of concern here that we're not going as big and as bold as we would have liked. So,
yeah, but I mean, in general, I think this is kind of just going off script here. The Athletic put out some grades earlier this week, and the grades are each given by each reporter for the team, so it's not a comprehensive evaluation of the Orioles offseason, but Dan Connolly gave him a C+, and we're going to give our grades later on. But kind of the general consensus on Twitter seemed to be that C+ seemed pretty fair for what the Orioles have done. And We'll see if we agree on that. But yeah, we'll talk through the Orioles moves, what they did, what they didn't do, maybe rehash a couple of the smaller things from earlier in the offseason that we may have forgotten happened. Then we are also going to go through prospect rankings. Most of the big public-facing rankings are out. The only one that hasn't come out is Fangraphs. But we've got, I think, 5 different publications that put their stuff out. So it gives you a pretty good idea of how the industry is evaluating the Orioles. We'll talk through that and just kind of get our general take on it. And then finally, just kind of a quick whip around about Orioles ownership situation and what is going on, because the last 2 weeks there, not that anything monumental has happened, but it just seems like a calamity of errors, PR and otherwise, the last couple of weeks for the Orioles. So just kind of talk about that, take our temperature on the situation there, including some big stadium news that actually broke right before we got on to record tonight. So that's going to be kind of the agenda today, boys. But I think we'll start with the Orioles on-field moves. And I'm just going to kind of go through things and maybe we stop, pause, talk through them. First off is who became a free agent from the 2022 roster and is no longer with the organization. That would be Robinson Chirinos, Rougned Odor, Jesus Aguilar, and Jordan Lyles. Lyles has signed on with the Royals and Aguilar has signed on with the Athletics. That was a move I totally missed, by the way. I did not see, and it's a major league deal, but did you see that, which is kind of insane as well. But Chirinos and Odor are both still free agents. If we want to stop there, is that kind of how you figured things were going to go there, Eli? Did you expect any of that foursome to return to the Orioles this year?
There was obviously the hot debate about Lyles. We did talk about it on the last episode. That was surprisingly one thing we got in before our off-season break. But yeah, I mean, I didn't really expect him to sign. At least I hope I didn't. That's my memory of what I remembered. But yeah, I think this was probably the right way forward for the Orioles. I mean, none of those guys contributed too much. I also was amazed to see Aguilar get a major league deal, but then again, it is the Athletics who, you know, even if they had signed him to a minor league deal, we know they don't have the talent to keep him down in the minor leagues, so he would have been there anyways. So this all checks out. I'm not weeping tears over any one of them.
Yeah, fair enough. Jesse, about you, anything? Are you upset about Rougned Odor not being an Oriole?
No, I'm not. I mean, I remember we had frequent conversations about how we need to make sure priority, like one of the biggest priorities is that he's not on the team for 2023. No, I mean, I think, Gibson is definitely an upgrade over Lyles. You know, he's not a massive upgrade. I wouldn't say there's not like a big distinction in their abilities. So, you know, whether we had re-signed Lyles again or went with Gibson, you know, I don't think in the long run it'll make a huge difference. You know, and I do remember the one person I do remember arguing that we may have an outside chance of re-signing was Chirinos to back up Adley. But I'm, you know, especially given the amount of time that we expect the backup to be playing, I think it's good that we found an upgrade in McCann for Adley. So,
yeah, there was a lot of moving parts at the catcher position this offseason, but they have settled in on a good situation there, which we'll get to in just a second. Yeah, not a huge shock that any of those four are not back. I didn't even think Lyles was going to come back just because Lyles ended up in like a perfect situation for him to do kind of the same thing he just did for the Orioles again, but I don't know if it's more money, but it's more money than the Orioles are going to give him.
He got 2 years. It
right.
Wasn't the like 10 million annual, but he did get 2 years. So the total contract is worth more.
Yeah. Which good for Jordan Lyles. I mean, that's, you know, there's clearly value beyond just what your stats are to be able to say like, hey, my team is not great. All of the Orioles ended up being pretty solid, but the Royals are probably going to stink. We're not good. We need somebody to pitch. We'll give you more money than you're probably worth to pitch for us. And hey, that's awesome for Jordan Lyles. I don't know if he'll ever go to the playoffs again, but good for him. A couple other big, I don't know how to describe it. 2 other players that left this offseason that are notable names are Yusniel Diaz and Tyler Nevin. Diaz was DFA'd and then released, and Nevin was DFA'd and then traded to the Detroit Tigers. Jesse, maybe I'll go to you just to kind of get your parting thoughts on Yusniel Diaz not being an Oriole anymore. I mean, he was the key component of the Manny Machado trade so many years ago. Clearly, Dean Kramer now has usurped him as like the most important player there. But, you know, any feelings for Diaz kind of going out of the Orioles organization with a whimper?
Right. Yeah, I mean, he's kind of representative of how difficult, you know, life can be for minor league baseball players trying and struggling to make the major leagues. Even if you're a highly rated prospect, right, there are no guarantees ever. And that's why I think especially recently there's sort of been, you know, more valuation on like major league talent and sort of a move toward that. But yeah, I mean, I think that like, I mean, the whole story, especially, you know, given his injuries over the past few years, his frequent injuries over the past few years probably held him back a lot from, you know, fully growing and developing. And then, yeah, and not only all of that, he never even really got a legitimate chance at the major league level, which I'm not saying he, you know, anybody is ever entitled to or anything.
Right.
But he never even got, you know, a month or two up at the majors. He had one at bat for the Orioles last year where he struck out, and then he got immediately sent back down. So yeah, it's kind of right. I mean, there were so, you know, like you were saying, he was the centerpiece of the Machado deal at the time. There was you know, a lot of high hopes that he would hold down a corner outfield position for us, you know, for several years to come. From the Orioles perspective, you know, I think like all the outfield prospects that we have, I think make it, you know, losing Diaz in terms of the Orioles outlook easier, because at this point, especially where he is in his career, he's really not needed. And we definitely have prospects that are definitely at this point probably have more potential and are more likely to be effective and be effective major league players for the Orioles. So in terms of a baseball outlook perspective at this time, it's not a big deal. I mean, of course, if, you know, I guess if 3 years ago or whatever, he was, you know, a major league outfielder for us, that could have made a difference, right? If he had developed fully and, you know, sort of lived up to the potential. But at this point, having him not on the roster is not that relevant to the Orioles moving forward, despite, you know, the disappointment, you know, that yeah,
that the Machado trade was
that comes with the move. Yeah, I mean we do have Kramer, but you know, Kramer obviously isn't a Machado, so
yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it's been 5 years. This will be the 5th year, I guess, without Machado since that, because that was 2018. So yeah, I mean that's just kind of the reality of it, right? Is those trades don't always age super well. You kind of pin your hopes on one guy, and I think we thought Diaz was that guy, but turns out Kramer is, and hey, that's how it goes. Also Tyler Nevin, bummer for Tyler Nevin, but actually also like it's like the least surprising development I think of the offseason.
Yeah, he was top of the list as we brought in pretty much anybody to get kicked off the roster. So
yeah, well, yeah, and related to that is a couple of minor league signings they had throughout the winter, which were players that, I mean, Tyler Nevin could play third base, but, you know, considering we have Gunnar Henderson, Ramon Urias just won a Gold Glove. Tyler Nevin probably wasn't going to see too much time at third base. He was mostly going to be a first base, DH, maybe corner outfield option, and one that couldn't really hit all that well. So that's a tough thing to convince a team to give you innings there. But the Orioles did make a bunch of minor league signings. A couple of the noteworthy ones, Lewin Diaz and his DFA fiasco of an offseason, Franchy Cordero, was a Red Sox recently, Ryan O'Hearn, and Nomar Mazara. the Orioles have kind of gone all in on left-handed first base types, Eli. I mean, do you see anything interesting with their choice to do that? And does that tell you anything about maybe, what the organization is thinking a weakness is for them?
Yeah, I think they're looking for one of these guys to, make an impact in spring and end up on the 26 man. I do think, it's interesting that they are going for Lewin Diaz to an extent, but mostly Franchy Cordero and Nomar Mazara just have this insane, prodigious raw power. And so they're clearly looking for that thump in the middle of the order. To an extent, I think that's what they were looking for. Of course, he wasn't a lefty, but when they brought in Aguilar, somebody to come off the bench and just provide some thump, provide, just a little bit of intimidation in the lineup. I don't know. I'm not sure I fully buy into any one of these guys, but Franchy Cordero and Nomar Mazara have both hit balls 500 feet in major league games. So, I'm not mad at it. It's definitely grab a couple spark plugs and see if you can catch lightning in a bottle. So I think it's I think it's reasonable. The thing that is interesting about it, I think it does show a certain element of doubt in Ryan Mountcastle. I think that, we all talked about how Mountcastle was unlucky all year. His batted ball profile definitely was better than the results showed. That said, the reality of the fact is he's going to be playing in a park with a left field wall that's 700 feet away for, the rest of this rookie team control period. So he is disadvantaged by that. And as long as you are looking for, your first baseman to provide authority in the lineup, having that person standing on the right side of the plate, I think is partially disadvantageous in Camden Yards. So I think it makes sense to try to bring in some left-handed bats. Don't get me wrong. I do not think that there's any chance Ryan Mountcastle isn't our starting first baseman on opening day. He's around, and he's around for the long haul. But I think it makes sense to try to play some matchups, potentially. If any one of these guys starts to string some stuff together, starts to make some better swing decisions, starts to see the ball a bit better than they have in the past, then they can provide some thump, and we've got the nice flag court that is calling their name in right field.
Yeah, it's interesting, because like what you just said, Mountcastle is the first baseman, and all of these guys have had a bite at the Major League apple. You know what I mean? They've had their chance, hasn't gone well, and I think that if Mountcastle's not your first baseman, one of them is, something is wrong, and we've got bigger problems, and I think a trade has to be made. But I do think if Ryan Mountcastle goes down for 2 weeks, okay, I could have one of these guys come up, play a role for 2 weeks, and then Ryan comes back into the fold, which I think that maybe tells us they don't love the first base options they have at Bowie or Norfolk. And it's because they haven't really drafted those types of guys. They've been very middle of the field focused, apart from getting a couple corner guys that they've had, like Heston Kjerstad a couple years ago, and then Colton Cowser's kind of a center fielder, corner outfielder. But yeah, I think it's something that they clearly didn't feel confident in those options behind Ryan Mountcastle. But that doesn't. I still agree with your point that this is kind of a show me sort of year for Ryan Mountcastle, because yes, you can hit the ball really hard, and that should eventually lead to doubles and home runs, but you've got to play in the park that you're dealt. And right now that is Camden Yards. So, Ryan Mountcastle is the first base for 2023, but I don't know if he's guaranteed anything beyond that. If this team has higher aspirations, maybe they've got to do something. But it was an interesting string of moves. Jess, did you have anything to add to that conversation?
I mean, I think the thing that is interesting is I feel like they're largely moves, sort of like you said, bracing for a potential injury or something like that, because I think Adley is going to be the one who probably plays first base when Mountcastle needs to sit down.
For like a day, you're saying?
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly. So when Hyde doesn't like the matchup with Mountcastle over at first, right, I think Adley will probably be used that day to sort of take a rest from behind the plate and from his catching responsibilities. So that's kind of how I'm envisioning it. I don't imagine, if Mountcastle is healthy, I don't generally think that Mazzara or Cordero would just sit on the bench behind him.
No.
Yeah, just being limited to basically only playing first, even though Mazzara plays a little bit of outfield too, though, right? But I don't.
Yeah, he's been a corner outfielder in most of his time in the bigs, but
right.
He's never been good at it. So,
and I don't think, and he's not going to get any time in our outfield. So, yeah. So
he's probably comparable to Santander out there, but
defensively, you mean?
Yeah, defensively.
Okay. Yeah, Oh, go ahead, Tyler. I mean, I just think we have options, other than Mazzara. I don't see it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it just gives the roster so much less flexibility. Like, yeah, I guess he could technically play first base, corner, outfield, but that's not that much flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think you're right on Rutschman playing some first base, and I think James McCann said as much. Like when he was coming over, he was like, "They told me and Adley are going to play some first base," and McCann was bad against lefties last year, but previous to that, he'd been pretty good against lefties. Mountcastle really struggled with lefties last year, so we maybe see him sit against lefties more often. We'll see. But, Rule 5 draft, the Orioles protected Grayson Rodriguez, Drew Rom, Noah Denoyer, and Seth Johnson from the Rule 5 draft. No real head scratchers there. Grayson Rodriguez was a no-brainer, and the rest, and Seth Johnson, they weren't going to not protect him after trading for him mid-season, so that makes a lot of sense. They didn't lose anybody in the MLB portion of the Rule 5, which was kind of surprising, I felt like. And then they did make a selection taking right-handed pitcher Andrew Politi from the Red Sox, and he will be expected to compete for a bullpen spot. Does anybody have anything on Andrew Politi that they'd like to share at this time?
I don't know. I can say last year was his first year transitioning to the pen, and he's kind of he's a mid-80s guy. He does have a more vertical curveball and kind of a short, hard slider. They do classify him as having a slider and a cutter, two distinct pitches, but they say they're pretty similar in profile. So I think that I think that he's somebody who, if this were the Orioles of 2021, would undoubtedly be with us for a full year. But this year, our rotation, I don't know, as we can kind of talk about as we're going, but our rotation is filling up, and that's pushing the likes of, I don't know, I think Tyler Wells, DL Hall, Austin Voth, I think all of these guys are going into the pen, and I'm not entirely sure that there will be room for a project, so to speak, which is a pleasant surprise being an Orioles fan. We're used to having a Rule 5 player on the team all year, sometimes two. So
yeah.
Plus the stellar bullpen we had last year, and we have guys in the rotation getting pushed to the bullpen. I don't think the Orioles realistically think that, he will make it all year. I mean, maybe they think, maybe he shocks us, but I think more likely they view him as temporary and as someone who will eventually be given back.
Well, and it's, it's kind of, like you said, the bullpen was really good last year, but something to me feels like there's some smoke and mirrors to some elements of it. I think Felix Bautista is really, really good. Probably not as good as he was at certain times, but still really good. The clear closer and the top guy in the pen. Cionel Perez, his peripherals are a little spotty. Who knows if that's really going to stick. Dylan Tate is a guy that all these years later, I still don't love when he comes into the game, because I just don't love when he's in the game. He just feels like something's going to go wrong at any moment. But that's
could you elaborate on that? Because
he doesn't strike people out for what the stuff he has. He doesn't strike people out. And as a Major League Baseball, as a pitcher, as a bullpen guy that can't strike people out, that scares me.
I will say I've kind of got. I know Jesse is one of the biggest Dylan Tate fans in the world.
Yeah.
I've got a twofold thing. A, yeah, he does not strike people out, which is super weird. B, I do think his stuff actually took a really large jump last year, particularly the changeup. It was truly an elite pitch. So I do think that, I don't know, between the sinker coming in at 97 and that changeup that, I don't know, we've seen it get 22 inches of arm side run. I think Tate is a really good seventh inning guy. like I'm not sure he'll ever be a closer, but I am confident holding two that he can come in, get you a ground ball, and get out of a tough situation.
Oh yeah, and I'm not saying that Andrew Paletti is going to come in and replace Dylan Tate.
Right.
But if you think your bullpen, every bullpen in the league, there's going to be a pitcher that was really good last year that's going to suck this year. That's just like the rule of bullpens. So if the options were, let's go get a free agent veteran and pay him probably too much to be not good, or let's spend $100,000 on a Rule 5 pick, bring him to the spring, see what he can do. Maybe he does surprise us. Maybe he is better than, Nick Vespi or something. I know he's left-handed, but
definitely.
You know what I mean? Like that kind of a thing. And if he's not, okay, cool. We got him. We can send him back to the Red Sox. They'll probably take him and we'll get 50 grand back or whatever it is. So, yeah, I think why not? It's a low risk, probably a low reward type of a move, but why not?
Elias doesn't mind spending $50,000 and $30,000 here and there to get an acquisition that might not work out. He's willing to spend the money. So.
Unfortunately, he's not willing to spend more money on acquisitions that will 100% work out.
Correct.
Yeah,
I was kind of joking about that.
I know.
I picked up on it, Jess.
I brought it home for you, Jess.
Thank you.
But all right, well, let's talk about some of the money he did spend this offseason. The first one Jesse alluded to, Kyle Gibson, the Orioles signed him. He was with the Phillies last year, 1 year, $10 million deal. He's going to take the Jordan Lyles role of the veteran innings eater type guy. As Jesse kind of said, he's incrementally or like slightly better than Lyles pretty much across the board. But he's going to cost less than Lyles would have for the Orioles to trigger the option, which I think was $11 million.
In a weird way, it's the exact same, though, because they had a $1 million buyout. So, like, the decision not to pay Lyles was a $10 million difference.
There you go.
So
you either way, you probably came out a little bit ahead because Kyle Gibson, I think, is slightly better. But, Jess, you kind of gave your thoughts there, so maybe, Eli, I'll go to you on if you like this move or how you feel about it.
Yeah, I like Gibson. I mean, a lot of people pointed I don't know, people online, and you can't trust people online, but people online were upset because his results last year, quite frankly, were not good. Yeah. But he is largely a pitch to contact guy. He's not going to strike out, 9 per 9 or anything like that. And he was playing in front of the worst defense in the league in what is a little bit of a hitter's park. And so, it stands to reason that with Jorge Mateo behind him, with Gunnar at third, with Cedric in center field, that we're going to be in a situation where he will perform better than he did last year, just on that alone. But then beyond that, I mean, the guy was an all-star the year before. Granted, it was with the Rangers, and you have to send one, from every team. But, he's a pretty legitimately good pitcher. He threw 180 innings last year or so, and so we can expect him, as Tyler said, to fill that kind of innings eating role. I think it was a good move. Like you said, Tyler, he is incrementally better and essentially the exact same price as Lyles. So I'm pretty cool with it.
Yeah, kind of the theme of the offseason was incrementally better.
That's exactly right.
Across the board. Jess, did you have anything else to add on Gibson? Or do you feel like you kind of covered it?
You're muted, Jess.
I think that got it.
Okay. Cool. Let's move on to Adam Frazier. We're not totally clear on what position he's going to play, but the Orioles did sign him to a 1 year, $8 million deal. He's mostly been a second baseman in his career, but I think he's got experience all over the field. I think he did play some corner outfield for the Mariners last year. Another guy that was not good last year and was definitely not good compared to some of his career numbers. To give you guys kind of a quick rundown, last year he batted .238 with a .301 on base, .311 slugging. But just like Gibson in 2021, he was an all-star with the Pirates for most of that year, where he batted .324 with a .388 on base and a .448 slugging for the Pirates before he was traded to the Padres, where his season kind of took a nosedive. This feels sort of like a replacement for Odor, who was the Orioles' second baseman most of the time, which is, in my opinion, a little interesting because the Orioles have a plethora of middle infield prospects that they've not traded this offseason, and they're not clearly anointing any one of them the second baseman. Jess, do you want to kind of expand on your outrage that you just exhibited there?
Well, it's not outrage, but yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like we've accumulated all these prospects. We have options available, and I think there's a good chance that he's going to be holding somebody back. I mean, there's a possibility, like you said, he could play all over the field. So, if McKenna was slated to be on the team this year, which I don't really think he was, but if he was,
like McKenna,
right?
You don't think Ryan
yeah,
McKenna's
I'm
going to be
sorry,
on
what?
the team?
I'm sorry.
You don't think Ryan McKenna's going to be on the team?
I think he'll be up and down. No,
I think you're crazy.
I think he's like the perfect fourth outfielder.
Yeah, I think he's
Okay. So,
162 games of the year on the team, not playing. But.
Yeah, I mean, so like I felt like I'm kind of wondering whether Frazier would sort of take that, be sort of a replacement for him or a utility guy that could play all over. So, I mean, I don't know, but yeah, I mean, I feel like we have options. We have Vavra, for instance, and I'm just a little confused as to how he's going to fit into the mix of everything. Plus, that means that, right, where's Urias going to play? I mean, that brings up questions for him. And then, yeah, any of the options, also like Joey Ortiz or somebody like that,
Right.
like, how can he get slated at second base now that Frazier's been signed? So, it's just kind of difficult to see how he's going to fit in, and it's going to be hard to make sure he's not blocking somebody, and that's kind of where I'm a little I mean, I'm not going to say it's definitively a bad move, but it's probably not the direction I would have gone, and it doesn't address sort of what I think the need is. I do remember recommending or considering signing like Gene Segura, or somebody of that, kind of player to play second, but he's actually, would be a legitimate, second baseman that would probably at this point be a legitimate upgrade over the other options. And it's not clear that Frazier is. So.
Sure. Yeah. And Segura, I think the knock on Segura, he has a good fielder, actually, now that I'm looking at numbers, because Frazier got like pretty good numbers defensively, not great, but yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting move. Eli, did you want to get in with your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess just super quick. Like, I think that what Tyler said, I do think Frazier is a legitimately good fielder. I think what this does, I think there's a 0% chance now that the Orioles do not have a super active deadline. As you guys have said, there's no possible way that all of these middle infielders fit on one roster. It reminds me of like 2001 backyard baseball when I'm getting like Derek Jeter, Alex Rodriguez, and Alex Gonzalez and just taking the three shortstops and putting them around. It's like we've got this plethora of middle infield and just like overall infield talent. And yeah, I mean, Westberg, Ortiz, these guys are going to be starting to push up. Connor Norby is going to be pushing up at second base. Yeah. And quite frankly, defensively, you can't really put him anywhere else. So yeah, it's like, it is interesting. That said, at the same time, I think our team as it stands, I think Adam Frazier is a significant upgrade to Terry Vavra. And I think that, it might end up in a situation where him and Urias are platooning a little bit. If Gunnar needs a day off, Urias jumps over to third. I think that having four infielders to play the three positions is the way to go. And Adam Frazier is definitely a starting caliber, middle infielder in the MLB. And if he returns to anything like his all-star form from 2021, then you hit a jackpot for $8 million.
Yeah, two things on first, the Segura thing Jesse mentioned is I didn't realize he had gotten a 3-year deal with the Marlins. That makes sense to me. The Orioles didn't want to do that because he's 32, going to be 33 on opening day. They weren't going to give a 33-year-old a 3-year deal, so I can understand that. And I think like in general, the Orioles like whole thesis and like goal of the offseason seems to be like just get through the first like 3 months of the season at a 500 record. Like just get through them. Be 500.
I think that's exactly right. Like it seems like they were just like I mean, do absolutely nothing to the ceiling and just raise the floor just a little bit to just continue what we had last year, and then figure out ways to make an impact later.
Right.
I'll let
Or
you
like,
keep going, sorry.
or just reassess halfway through. Right.
Well, yeah, you could reset, because if it all goes sideways, that's something too. I mean, I don't know that the deadline's probably a little bit differently if things go sideways, but your next off season probably isn't. But yeah, I think it's like literally just like get through it. I don't know. They're not really in a rush, obviously, to get minor leaguers up to the majors and like show them off, because I think what can happen if you do that is, I don't know that anything like DL Hall came up last year, was not good last year. I don't know that that's really dented his value in baseball circles, but like we'll talk about prospect rankings in a little bit. He's gone down in like pretty much all the prospect rankings because he came up, was erratic, didn't look great, had good stuff, but couldn't throw a strike. Like all the negatives you ever heard about DL Hall showed themselves on the major league stage last year.
Exactly.
And potentially you saw some things kind of fall apart there. The same thing could happen to Joey Ortiz or Connor Norby or whoever if you bring them up and they just struggle a little bit. So why not just keep them in AAA, let them keep filling up the stat sheet. That lets you get more data on them too. The team's 500. Okay. Joey's really crushing it. We really buy his numbers now. He's the second baseman and we're trading Connor Norby and somebody else for Shane Bieber. You know what I mean? Like it allows the Orioles to get more information. So Adam Frazier is an $8 million Band-Aid to allow them those 3 months to make a decision on that stuff, which is like convoluted and frustrating because I think the team could be so much better this year, but they're not caring about these first 3 months. And then really things start in 2024 is kind of how they're like positioning, which I hate, but I'm just saying.
Just real quick, Jess, sorry. It seems like they're delaying committing, sort of.
Yeah.
You know, it's just kind of like, okay, let's hold, okay, go. You know, it's
right.
like, and we haven't seen the go. We are just like in this holding pattern and we're like right on the precipice, ready to like, I don't know, ready to dive in. And it just hasn't happened yet.
Right.
My thing with that, Tyler, is I get what you're saying. Yes, it allows the Orioles to collect more data and stuff like that. I guess I don't really believe if Joey came up, started at second base, you know, or Norby, you know, or whoever it is, whoever they think would do the best, right? Started at second base, that his value would dramatically decline, even if he really struggled in a few months at the major league level, you know, especially if he got, you know, sent back down and then started raking again, you know, or whatever. So that's kind of the only thing that I guess I would disagree in the analysis. And the potential for that, right, is high, right? I mean, their value would skyrocket if they started really producing at the major league level. You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, but then if they start producing at the major league level, that's your guy. That's not the Cleveland Guardians guy. You know what I mean?
But but then you know that, and you have these other guys that are available for trade.
Well,
you know?
I also think like
the picture is crystallized at that
we've
point.
Also experienced like a dynamic shift these last couple of years. I think in like 2016, 2017, whatever, the Orioles, I think, were viewed as like a backwards organization that didn't really know how to develop talent, just like got lucky a couple times, had a generational guy in Manny Machado, you know. And I think now in 2023, the Orioles are looked at in the industry as like they know what they're doing with player development. So like if there's that black box of the minor leagues and the numbers, like, okay, well, Baltimore developed this guy. Let's try and go get him. But if you put him up to the major leagues, that black box is taken away now. We can see exactly what he is because he's facing the best of the best. And oh, maybe he's not so good. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how I think of it is the Orioles they haven't like won a World Series or anything, but I think like in terms of player development, they're starting to like, they've got the secret sauce that other teams maybe don't have in some ways. And you can keep those players in the minors and protect their value a little bit. Now that's maybe me like definitely looking at things through orange tinted glasses, and maybe it's not true, but that's how I'm reading stuff.
Yeah, I think the O's like have a little bit of like a player development brand. You know, they have like when it is stamped with the orange O, there's a little bit of a premium on it. I think that's true. And I think, you know, we're going to talk about the prospect rankings. Like we have, I think, 11 guys who all made it into the top 100 in these various rankings. It's like unbelievable, and for reference, if you got 30 teams in the league and 100 spots, you should have 3.
Right.
So there's definitely like a premium that comes with the Orioles brand right now.
I mean, you're right, but the 11 you're saying is compiled on different lists, so that's
but we had 8 or 9, which is what you would have if there are 12 teams in the league.
Right.
Oh, you're saying 8 or 9 on one list. I'm just saying
on every single list. Yeah.
I'm just saying the 11 was a little slightly unfair based on how you were.
But I mean, I'm just saying that. All right, then that means that we got 11 of the top 125.
Right, that's what I was going to say.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I just don't want the audience to be confused. And
the audience they're not dumb. They know.
Okay, I'm not saying they're dumb. I'm just saying like.
Look,
it was like a slight
Jesse
of
thinks you're very stupid.
You did it right.
Jesse doesn't respect you.
If somebody was trying to lie with numbers, they might do a sleight of hand like that. I don't know.
Okay,
anyway,
right.
I know that's not what you were doing.
Right. So
I just wanted to be clear. That's all.
All right. Let's keep going through these. We got 3 more moves to talk about before we get into the prospects. Mychal Givens is coming back to the Orioles. Jesse, I know you're ecstatic about that. It's a 1-year, $3 million contract with a mutual option for 2024 that if both sides pick it up, it's worth $6 million. If Gibbons picks it up, but the Orioles don't, it's worth $2 million. And then if the Orioles pick it up, but Gibbons doesn't, it's worth $1 million. It's here's the deal. They're not both going to pick up the mutual option. So Mychal Givens will be here for 1 year.
It'll be a $5 million guarantee. Right.
Jesse, how are you feeling about Mychal Givens coming back?
I mean, I like it. I it's going to be interesting because when he left us, he was like our 8th inning, sometimes rarely our 9th inning guy, and he's going to be coming back to us as a 6th or 7th inning guy, given our bullpen. So it'll be interesting to see the change in how he's utilized. But I mean, obviously, as you said, I've loved Mychal Givens for a long time. I think he's a great asset to a bullpen just because of his arm angle. I mean, that alone, I think, like really, boosts his value to any bullpen. Having a guy like Darren O'Day or Givens, somebody like that.
Chad Bradford.
Exactly. So, I mean, from that perspective, I think it gives our bullpen a greater diversity of, types of arm angles, velocities, that sort of thing. So I think it's a good pickup from there, and I think he's gonna be a solid reliever for us. So I like it.
Do you think his warm-up song will still be "Ready or Not" by the Fugees?
I don't know. Now that you say that, yeah, I mean, it's a great
been a long time
walk-up song. Yeah. I mean, I guess a lot has changed. A lot of new songs have come out in that time that he might be tempted by.
Yeah, the Fugees wasn't exactly a new song when he was.
No, that's true. That's true. But like, there's still another 4 years of worth of selection that he could choose from.
Fair enough.
But yeah, no, I'm excited about it. I think it's good, and I think he'll do well for us. Yeah.
Eli, do you think he'll do well for us?
I think he will. I do need to say, like, I had forgotten this about him, and was disappointed in myself for that. But there definitely were some domestic abuse allegations flying against him. So when I was reminded of that on Twitter, and appropriately so, I was a little bit disappointed again. But I can't say I know the outcomes of those, whatever, but it is always significant that somebody felt they were in a place where, they needed to speak out about such a thing. And, I looked it up a tiny bit before this and didn't find any huge conclusion, but they are now divorced. It did end. So I don't know. It's something worth saying.
Yeah.
Character is in question as to an on the field product. I think he's a good reliever. Like Jesse said, I think that there is value in having different arm angles out of your pen. I remember when the Rays were taking on the playoffs and Nick Anderson was kind of leading the charge. They went through and they showed the 8 or 9 arm angles. and it made a perfect like 180 the 8 or 9 arm angles out of the Rays bullpen, and it made a perfect 180-degree semicircle. It was unbelievable, just like all over the place. And there's a lot of value in giving those different looks. There is a lot of value in Felix Bautista coming from, like releasing the ball 9 feet up in the air at 100 miles an hour. And then Dylan Tate at the 3/4 slot with 98, and then Mychal Givens, full sidearm at 94. It's difficult to keep picking up these changes in speed, keep picking up these new arm angles. And I think that's an interesting point. I think it's worth mentioning. And I think that the Orioles, know exactly what they're getting in him. He's really a 2-pitch guy. He's a fastball slider guy. He'll continue to be that. And yeah, you talk about volatility in a rotation. I think this is, or in a bullpen, I think this is kind of hedging bets against that because he has been around for a number of years and he's a pretty stable product as far as the bullpen piece goes. So I like the move from the baseball standpoint. I do think, I think it was a good pickup. I think it, once again, like raises our floor incrementally. If Brian Baker implodes, you've got Mychal Givens to take over the 6th inning. As simple as that. Yeah,
that's a good point. And I think what you mentioned about the domestic violence is important to note too. This is like, we're a baseball podcast, and I think we like the sport first and foremost. And we have to remember that this game's played by people, and that's both for good or for bad. And, it's tough sometimes to remove to just root for the jersey, you know what I mean? And I know that's what I try to do, is because I'm sure there's been Orioles over the year that have been terrible people, and there will be terrible people in the future that are Orioles. And
how about Sidney Ponson back in the day?
Yeah. How about Alfredo Simon shot a guy, didn't he?
I did not hear that.
What wasn't that Alfredo?
I don't remember that.
I'm gonna have to find this now.
Hopefully you're not disrespecting Alfredo Simon's name, right? Wait. So as far as Ponson, didn't he just have DUIs? I mean, obviously that's bad and not good,
I think he was like, granted, I was like 7 years old at the time, but I remember like DUIs and a generally bad character. Like, I don't know. I remember anger issues and like just a generally bad temperament. And
that sounds
together for me.
Yeah, that sounds like alcoholism.
Yeah, well,
how much you want to
and
give
you could
him
be
responsibility for that is
for
something.
sure.
Well, yes. That's a more complicated decision or discussion. Like, there's alcoholism and there's deciding to get behind the wheel of a car, which are two different things. For sure. But Alfredo Simon was alleged of involuntary manslaughter after a New Year's Eve celebration where he shot a gun in the air and it hit somebody, killed them.
Oh my God.
And then he was also alleged to have raped a woman and was sued for $15 million in 2014. So,
that's good to know.
This is all, we're going, we're getting into the nitty gritty here, but I don't think that if somebody's made a mistake that their whole life should be ruined, but also we need to acknowledge that these people have high paying, high profile jobs, and you're not just entitled to have those if you are someone who's conducted themselves poorly. And that's an ongoing issue in Major League Baseball. Trevor Bauer, Mike Clevenger,
all sports, really,
all sports. But those guys should be held accountable, and you hope the Orioles have done their due diligence on Mychal to make sure that any issues he has had have been resolved, or he's repentant or whatever it may be. Because I know it's definitely complicated to like want your team to win, but if you don't like the person who's doing those things, it can be complicated. So we understand that, and you're free to fan the way you want to fan. That's how I think of things. So
also, that was very well said. But also Aubrey Huff, we can't get through this conversation without just saying that name. So good to proceed.
Aubrey Huff. Kurt Schilling was an Oriole for a little bit.
That's true.
I was thinking about Luke Scott too.
Oh yeah.
So we've had our fair share of bad
and that's,
people.
It's bad in different ways. There's some guys that have bad opinions. There's some people who have bad actions. It's complicated. People are complicated.
All right.
And we will try to call them out here when deemed appropriate.
Yeah.
moving back into the
maybe we should just have an episode like philosophizing, like about like just giving our opinions about all this sort of thing. Yeah.
I think I
feel like that would be a really useful use of time.
Yeah, that's definitely what our audience
is looking for.
For sure. Back to the acquisitions from the offseason. The Orioles traded for catcher James McCann from the New York Mets in exchange for minor leaguer Luis de la Cruz and cash. Jesse, this addresses the backup catcher thing you mentioned earlier. How do you feel about James McCann as the backup? Does this feel like an upgrade from Robinson Chirinos, or where's your gut at there?
Oh, well, no doubt it's an upgrade. The one thing that did stand out to me is, it is sort of a long contract to have for somebody who's going to be a backup catcher. So that's kind of an interesting decision the Orioles made. With that said, he's definitely probably a better catcher than his numbers showed last year. He was an all-star, I believe, at one point. Is that
2019?
Correct?
Yeah, 2019, and also a bunch of his salaries being paid by the Mets while he's here. So
right. Well, that's the other thing, right? Exactly. Is that the Orioles got him for really cheap, relatively, and right, the Mets are covering basically. The Mets wanted to get rid of him basically, so the Orioles were sort of taking advantage of a situation, which they sort of did with the Athletics too, which we'll talk about. But But yeah, I mean, I think it's a good move. I think he's a good upgrade overall. I mean, I guess there's always opportunity for the Orioles to deal him too, if necessary. But I was just thinking about I think it is a good move. It's just kind of interesting. They're kind of locked into sort of a long-term contract for a backup catcher. But yeah.
Fair enough. It is kind of a weird setup there because you forget that he's got 2 or 3 more years after this, so he'll
2 more. Yeah,
he'll be an Oriole for a little while, unless he really struggles, and then in that case, I think they're only on the hook for $6 million or something beyond this season, so it's not huge.
Yeah, it was, his contract was 2 for 24 remaining, and they're paying down 19 of it, so we're on the hook for 5, which is I don't know, for 80 games of a reasonably okay catcher, that's more than worthwhile.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the robot ump stuff comes to be, and then if his framing that he's pretty good at becomes less valuable. If he's not hitting, then it's okay, what are we doing here? But that's not a problem for 2023. Yeah.
The one thing I will say that this sort of reminds me a little bit of, right? It very much is. It reminds me very much of Billy Beane and Moneyball. I remember when there was a time Billy Beane was talking about making some negotiation or some sort of contract, and he needed just a little bit of money, so he went to the Mets and he's like, hey, can you just give us I don't know what it was, 50,000, 100,000, 500,000, and the Mets were like, sure, why not, it means nothing to them. So it's kind of interesting that the Mets, are fine just giving the money away to the Orioles, and that is, they save $5 million, so good enough for them. They can wipe their hands clean of James McCann, and they don't really care. And the Orioles, are sort of Billy Beane sort of was using the Mets as a piggy bank in that situation, or just going to a bank and just getting free money, for nothing, basically. And that's kind of what it feels like a little bit the Orioles doing here. And sort of the Orioles doing the same thing sort of in reverse with the A's, which we'll talk about. But yeah, it's just kind of an interesting dynamic to see how all that stuff is moving behind the scenes, and how each team is approaching monetarily these sorts of negotiations from very different perspectives. So
yeah, I mean, the Mets, they made waves all offseason by spending, the last couple of years, for spending out the wazoo, but James McCann, that's just, we got to get something. We can't pay his whole contract, so we got to get a couple $1 million and Luis de la Cruz. But we'll see. But let's talk about the Oakland Athletics trade you just mentioned, Jesse. The Orioles finally got their like rotation piece that was more of an upgrade than Gibson. They traded for left-handed pitcher Cole Irvin and minor league right-hander Kyle Verbitsky from the Oakland Athletics in exchange for minor leaguer Daryl Hornet. Let me say that again. In exchange for minor leaguer Daryl Hernandez, shortstop, one of the pretty good middle infield prospects, but not quite the upper echelon that we've been talking about earlier today. Eli, you in our text chain, you seem pretty excited about the Cole Irvin trade. Do you maybe want to explain your feelings?
Yeah, I guess the first thing is like, we traded some of this minor league talent for major league talent. And that is, I don't know, that's the pinnacle of everything that us Orioles fans have ever wanted, is using this stockpile of wealth that we have accumulated and starting to shell it out in exchange for goods. It's like you came home with a bonus and you get to go buy yourself, a nice meal, and you get to finally come home and reap the benefits of all this work you've put in, all of this turmoil. I was like really, really amazed that the A's did this, period. Cole Irvin was he was on a unbelievably hot streak for like 10, 11 starts last year. He did finish the season a little bit cold, but as a whole, sub 4 ERA, really, really good walk rates. He doesn't strike many guys out, but he is an effective pitcher. He's an effective pitcher with 4 years of control remaining. He's, going to be on a pre-arb contract this year. We're going to pay the dude like $700,000, severely underpay him for a year's work, of like good, number 3, number 4 rotation stuff. Like he definitely is bolstering this rotation. He's a legitimate addition, and we have him for 4 more years at, subdued below market rates. It's like, it's wonderful. I'm super ecstatic about it. And it's like, it's definitely not a Carlos Rodon. This is not a dude who's going to come and start game 1 in the playoffs and, shut down those New York Mets we were talking about and roll through the Yankees and the Dodgers. It's not like that, but he is a talented pitcher. He's still like, in his mid to late 20s. So there's still some development that could happen. He's got obviously a new development scheme over here. So, there might be some stuff that we could tap into. But, being the soft thrower that he is, I think he averages like 91 on his fastball. He's probably never going to be some super, super impact guy, but this is the type of dude you need in a major league rotation in a contending, any playoff contending rotation. He's a great pickup. And the fact that we could do it with a shortstop who is very talented, who has had a lot of helium, has been on the rise, but just barely made it to Double-A Bowie last year. Like, I think that's wonderful. And we got some like 6'7" dude to stash in the minor leagues as well, along with it. I don't know like how 4 years of a major leaguer is worth less than Daryl Hernandez. I love Hernandez, but it just like, it was fascinating to me and it made me happy.
Yeah. Jesse, do you want to give your take and then I'll chime in?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of equally as shocking, I think, as Eli is sort of indicating here. Right. I mean, we know for all intents and purposes, we know that Cole Irvin is going to be a productive major league player. So right, the fact that we can give, exchange a maybe, right, without, Hernandez, like you were saying, like he's a very good player, but he's still a ways away from the major leagues and anything can happen in that time. And yeah, we're getting a player with 4 years of control. What's really surprising to me about it the most is that it really seems like the A's, even if they wanted to trade Cole, could have gotten a bigger return than Hernandez from, even if we weren't willing to do it, another team in the major is willing to do it. So I'm just kind of perplexed by that a little bit, but I do think it does, this is, I do think getting Irvin is worthy of the celebration sort of that Eli is talking about. I think this move is perfectly emblematic of Michael Elias's just general strategy in approaching these sorts of things, right? Like taking a bottom feeder, team, right? I don't know, maybe I'm not using that exactly correctly, but a bottom feeder team of the league and just sort of bullying them or taking advantage completely into I'm not,
I
don't
agree.
mean it
It's
in a
just
funny. I don't mean it in a funny way, but like just taking complete advantage. I guess because the A's don't want to pay Irvin arbitration, or arbitration salary in a year. I mean, I have no other, real explanation for it. But I don't know why the A's had that sort of desperation or seeming desperation to get rid of Irvin. But in any case, right? Yeah, I mean the Orioles.
Sorry.
I mean, this is an absolute steal in my mind, and this is it's really kind of shocking to me, at least. So
yeah, I mean, so I'll kind of give like what my reading on the situation is, because we've texted about this a little bit. As you guys said, Hernandez is kind of a prospect with helium, had a nice season, and it's at a position the Orioles have a lot of depth at. And he's a little bit older than Jackson Holiday, but plays kind of the same position. Is a guy that was never probably going to play for the Orioles, regardless if he got traded for the A's. Doesn't mean he's not doesn't have a major league future, but just the Orioles setup, he probably was just never going to play for the Orioles. So the Orioles were capitalizing on a player with some helium there. I think the same thing kind of goes for the Athletics. Irvin has some good numbers on the surface last year, despite some physical skills like Eli laid out that aren't like super otherworldly. He doesn't throw super hard, doesn't strike guys out, but he doesn't walk anybody either. His splits got brought up a lot after this trade. Oakland is a massive ballpark, all that foul ground, the outfield's huge, and he pitched great in Oakland. Had a 3.07 ERA at home, over 105 innings pitched. Then when he went away from Oakland, he had a 5.26 ERA, gave up 19 home runs in 75 and a third innings. That's an issue. The Orioles are hoping that their park is now more pitcher friendly. It seems like it is, especially for a left-handed pitcher, that he's going to come to Baltimore and have some success there. I don't know how it'll go on the road when he goes to Toronto, who's moving their fences in this offseason, goes to Yankee Stadium, that is notoriously hitter's park, Fenway with the Green Monsters like 10 feet away from home plate. It could be difficult for him, but again, that's the O's capitalizing on a helium prospect. The A's taking advantage of a player that had a nice season. And the A's also don't have a ton of prospects. The A's are in a tough situation. They are bad. Their stadium is bad. They might be going to Vegas. They don't have prospects. So I think anything they can get, they'll take. So I think that's just kind of how it is. But I think, yeah, anytime you can trade a minor leaguer for an established major leaguer with 4 years of team control, it's a no-brainer, and a huge win for the Orioles. And because, again, Hernandez may make it to the majors someday, and he may be a fine major leaguer. It wasn't going to happen in Baltimore, so tough to not really be happy about it.
I mean, it is possible, in the next couple of years or 2 or 3 years that Hernandez makes the majors for the A's, so it could be a situation that works out well for him. But yeah, it is. And just for clarity, Tyler, you were saying that
I knew you made a face when I said this.
Yeah, because I was just trying to figure it out a little bit what you were saying. You're saying it's a favorable pitching park, particularly for a lefty, theoretically, because righties have a matchup advantage, and then it's harder to hit the ball out of left field in Campton Yards.
Correct.
Did I follow that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Got you. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense. That tracks, right? I don't know if statistically lefties pitched better in Camden Yards last year, but
right.
Yeah,
it caught me a little off guard to hear it sort of put in that way. So I was trying to calculate in my mind and try to figure out exactly what you were talking about. So yeah.
Yes, you nailed it, Jess.
Gotcha. Okay.
Thank you for the explainer.
I will also say, with Cole's profile in particular, I don't know why I said Cole. Jesse was saying Cole earlier. With Irvin's profile at
Cole just sounds like a last name,
That's true,
you know.
does.
So that's
but
why
we're not talking about Garrett
right.
Cole, you know. It's
right,
like
right, yeah.
And his name is probably Nicholas, I guess, and he goes by Cole. I don't know.
Interesting. Well,
I think
Never
that's
thought
what
about
most-
that,
I
but
think
yeah.
that's what most Coles
Senor Irvin, what he does in particular is he actually, like, despite the low velocity, does like to elevate his fastball a bit. So I don't know, you know, if he can continue to do that on the outside half of the plate to a righty, you know, to his arm side, then I think that tracks that it's going to be tough to pull the ball. It's going to be tough to wrap around and for righties to really live in their power alley in left center. So hopefully we can continue to develop that and continue to like keep him effective there, I guess, by living up and away and, you know, with his fastball, with his four-seamer.
Yeah, and I mean, he threw, how many innings did he throw last year? I'm looking at 181 innings. You know, and he did 178 and a third the year before. So with him and Gibson, you potentially have 360 innings right there. I mean, that's huge. And they're not going to be Cy Young quality innings, but that just solves such a huge problem. And if John Means comes back midseason, now you've got like a very clear, like, I think 3-4-5 type of core there. And then Grayson Rodriguez is a 2 maybe, and you go and trade for Shane Bieber midseason. That's what's going to happen. So that's what the Orioles did do this offseason. Here's a quick list of things they did not do, at least not on February 1st, 2023. They did not sign or trade for an ace type of pitcher. They did not add a significant bat to the lineup unless you count James McCann or Adam Frazier as significant bats. They did not trade away Anthony Santander or Austin Hayes or Cedric Mullins for that matter. There was some chatter about that. They did not trade away any of their top prospects, and they did not sign Rutschman, Hernandez, or anyone else for that matter to a long-term extension.
Henderson.
Yeah, who is Hernandez?
Hernandez.
I can't read.
He meant Henderson.
Henderson. There's a
Gunnar
super prospect,
Hernandez.
Hernandez.
Gunnar
I mean,
Hernandez.
you just said Hernandez. We were talking about
That's what it
Hernandez.
was.
So then,
Thank
yeah.
Thank
We'll
you,
let you
Guy. I
off the-
appreciate that.
I
we'll
get
let
it.
you off the hook.
Yeah.
But those are the things the Orioles didn't do. If you guys want to expand on any of those, you're free to. But I think it's here where we maybe give like a grade for the Orioles offseason.
The one thing I will say, just to comment on that real quick, I mean, it's good because like we're here. So when any of us make like an error like that, you know, we're here to pick it up as opposed to like on Masson when one of the guys, like one of the announcers makes an error, like, you know, they just let it slide and they just keep going it never happened. Like the other guy never jumps in or the other person never jumps in and it's like, hey, oh, you meant, you know, like they just pretend it didn't exist and like just keep moving forward. Like, come on now.
Yeah.
But
we are clearly better than the professional broadcasters on that.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say here. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Eli, do you want to start addressing any of this? I mean, really, all of this.
I'm ready to give my grade.
All of this.
We've been talking about this for a minute.
All of this is worth addressing, honestly.
But you give a grade. Give a grade, and if it's a bad grade, explain why it's a bad grade, and you may hit on these points. So, Jess, do you have a grade in mind you want to give?
I mean, yeah. I think I'm right in line with Connolly, like around a C-ish. You know, like it's fine, it's good. It's slightly, you know, it's slightly encouraging. I think
it's satisfactory though.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Well, yeah. Does that push it down to the D range? I don't know, but I mean, but I mean, I do think it is pretty clear that the 2023 Orioles will be better than the 2022 Orioles. I do think that, and I do believe that. So that's why it's at least passing. You know, I mean, I guess the grade slightly depends on like what metric we're assessing them on, you know, like, but yeah, I mean, right. Like there was clearly no ambition, right? There was no creativity. There was no, drive to get an A on this project of the offseason. So, you know, that's why, you know, it's sort of lackluster, I gotta say.
Okay. So, but you're going with a C, like a 72%?
Yeah.
Like a C minus.
Yeah. If our, you know, Cole, went back to saying Cole. Yeah, Cole Irvin, I mean, is probably our most exciting acquisition, and it's a 3 or 4 starter. You know, I mean, you could argue, I guess Kyle Gibson is more exciting, but I think Irvin is more exciting because of the age and the length of the years of control. Yeah. So, so that's why I think he's the most exciting. But right, I mean, Cole Irvin, I mean, come on now. That's the best the Orioles can show us, you know, like
That's
All right, so
that's
Justin,
disappointing. Yeah.
make it a percentage. Where in the 70s are you?
Okay, I'll say 74. Yeah.
Okay.
Wow, just below average.
Yeah.
So like in my mind, you know, like C perfect 75 is right in the middle. F is bad, A is good. So
Yes,
for me,
that's how most of them go.
I think that's how it usually works. So for me, I'm going 78. You know, I am in the C plus range. I'm not like at the very tippy top of it, but it's you know, like Jesse said, I think that this team is better than the 2022 Orioles. I think that we have more depth. I think that I think we're like actually in a pretty good spot stepping into this year. I think those couple pitchers moving into the pen are going to make our pen, you know, like really, really strong once again. I think that we won't have struggles that we saw. I don't know, you know, Joey Crable will probably be back, but he doesn't need to pitch so often. You know, I think our pen has a bit more depth. I think that's a good thing. I think our infield has more depth. I think that everything looks fine. That said, you know, like as Jesse said, there was no ambition to go get an A on this project. It like you could have gone. I remember I talked about it, and if you signed Nimmo, Verlander, and Rondon or something like that, you know, that was $100 million increase, and you still have a payroll less than the Orioles' highest. So it's like, you know, the Orioles had the ability to do unbelievable, ungodly things this year and really put themselves in a position to immediately jump into contention and open up a window in the AL East. And we did not do it.
Yeah.
And that like is disheartening, but it also doesn't change the fact that we made some, I don't know, we used the word incremental 75 times in this, but we made some incremental upgrades. So got to give them slight positivity for that.
Yeah, I think I'm a little lower on it than you guys, mostly because like I like the Irvin trade. I think it is a good trade. I don't know that it takes the Orioles up a level. You know what I mean? I think it does like support things, but I view them as a little bit closer, like more of the same of what we've got, maybe a little bit better than the Tyler Wells sort of pitcher we've had that maybe would have been the 5-starter without him. But so I think I'm more like a 70, 71 for them because I agree with what you said. They're better now than they were at the end of the season, but there was just so much more potential. This team does not feel like a World Series contender to me, which you won 83 games last year. The schedule this year with the competition of the schedule should be easier for you. So that alone should give you another couple wins. If you go and get an ace starter, that maybe gives you another 5. You're into the 90 win range. Like there was so much potential. And instead you did like the bare minimum to get by.
It could have been turned into a World Series contender. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. If I was evaluating vibes points, I definitely would have deducted a couple. I was trying to be as like non-fan as possible. Yeah. And say like they did good things, so they have to be above average. But at the same time, like it was totally
sure. That's fair. I mean, I guess you know, depends on what average is. Like I think a lot of teams this offseason stood pat and had awful off seasons for like no discernible reason. Like I don't know what the White Sox did. I don't know what the White Sox did this winter.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The Rockies just did nothing. So like, you know, there's a lot of teams that I'm much happier to be an Orioles fan than those fans, but it's also frustrating because it's like, you know, I get it. I get we're waiting for the prospects to all pop and then you want to like come in with the reinforcements, but like, why not be ready for the pop to like take off? I still trust Mike Elias's plan and I think it's going in the right direction, but yeah, I mean, I think I'd be lying if you told me on November 1st that this is what the Orioles would look like on February 1st, I'd be like,
let's run the off season again and see what happens. Right. Exactly.
Redo the simulation.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'll give them a 70. Like, no, they're not in the doghouse with a D. Like, you don't need to come see me after class, but I'm not thrilled with it either, if I'm being honest.
For sure.
And the lack of extension talks with Rutschman, I think, is infuriating personally.
That's a big point. Yeah.
But I know I'm kind of alone on that.
We didn't mention that, and I think you're absolutely right. The fact that Julio Rodriguez got his extension, I mean, that just shows it's inexcusable, why the Orioles didn't try to make something work with Adley,
Yeah.
Or at least publicly, we're not aware of any negotiations or anything. Obviously, anything can happen behind the scenes, but yeah.
Right.
It's that's a great point, and we should have. I think that was worthy of me and Eli mentioning in our first little wrap up thing. Yeah,
I said Hernandez. Pick me up. You didn't mention the extension.
We left out that big glaring thing. Yeah, no, you're right.
So I will say though, like the Orioles front office, this one in particular has been notoriously tight-lipped, and so I don't know. I'm not confident that there haven't been those talks. I'm not confident that the Orioles haven't broached that conversation with either Rutschman or Hernandez.
The secret weapon Hernandez.
Right. So like I guess part of me isn't going to consider that a problem until they're in year 5, the second year of arbitration or something like that, and still no contract. That's when I'll really start freaking out.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'm not freaking out, but you just always feels like it's felt like we've been ahead of the 8 ball for a couple of years now in terms of like our plan for the future, and that's one thing where it's like, well, what are we doing? Like we're not trying to shore that guy up, so it's a little bit frustrating, but nonetheless, we'll revisit. We're all kind of in the same ballpark of grades. Jess, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, more than anything, I think like locking Adley up this offseason would be symbolic, right? Because like. Sure. More or less, like, yeah, we could do it in year 3 or year 4, 3 or, 2 or 3 years away from, his free agency. We could do it then. And practically speaking, there's probably little distinctions and, what the amount would be and, that sort of thing. But with that said, I think it is really important symbolically, for the organization to be like, hey, Adley, you're one of our guys. We're really excited to have you. It would hype up the fan base. They'd be really excited that the Orioles are willing to make a big financial commitment to a star player. You know what I'm saying? So I think even the symbolism of it, also Adley maybe having to worry a little bit less about, the money just moving forward, right? Like less pressure to produce. If we buy out his arbitration years, right, then he doesn't have to worry, oh, this is arbitration. I want to really do really well. Like he could just relax and play baseball. You know what I'm saying? So I think from a bunch of perspectives, I think it would have been really nice to lock up Adley and Henderson. And I also wonder if one of them wasn't there, would it have happened with the other one? You know what I'm saying? So I guess that's where it's a little complicated, because the Orioles might be asking themselves, well, if we pay him all this money, well, where does that leave us with Henderson? Now, we don't really. So again, not making excuses, because the Orioles have plenty of money to sign both of them. I want to be crystal clear about, not letting them off the hook and letting their cheapness slide. You know what I'm saying? So they have all the money they need to sign both of them to long-term, deals without cheaping out on them and without not paying them what they're worth. Right. So I want to be clear, but, practically speaking, with them trying to be as cost efficient as possible and trying to scrape to the bone and stuff like that, unfortunately, I think the fact that we have Henderson and Adley kind of will unfortunately make them a little more non-committal about giving either one of them money, because they might be in a position where they want to see how they play the next few years, see who really is the star, and then try to make a decision from there. It's sort of the same thing the Red Sox just went through with Devers and Bogarts, right? It was kind of a situation like that, and they ended up sort of choosing Devers, right, in that situation, which makes sense. But, I think the Orioles are, could be thinking about this in sort of a similar way. And that could be a partial explanation as to why they're not more non-committal. But again, I don't want to be giving them excuses and stuff, but, yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not something that had to be done this offseason, just a lot of talk of it. And hopefully there'll be talk of it at a future date as well. All right, let's talk prospects real quick. We won't harp on this too terribly long because it's basically just a rehash of all the lists that you can all go look out. But Baseball America, Baseball Prospectus, MLB Pipeline, The Athletic, and ESPN all have their top 100 prospect lists out now. In general, the Orioles did really, really well. As Eli mentioned earlier, 11 different prospects made the various top 100 lists. And I think the worst showing was Keith Law's with The Athletic, which of course it's Keith Law because Oriole fans love to hate on him. Eli,
I was going to say, I personally am shocked. And I'm also shocked that this is the one enter expletive here list that Gunnar Henderson is not the top prospect.
Yeah.
It was so I mean, you could have written a script and said, all these lists come out, the Orioles are doing unbelievably well. And there's one list, one single list. Who wrote it? It's Keith Law, of course.
Well, yeah, there's a couple things about Keith Law's list. First is that Henderson's not the top pick. It's Cody Carroll, or what's his name? Colby Carroll. Corbin Carroll with the Diamondbacks. Another thing is Colton Cowser's not on his list at all, right. Which is a bit of a bummer. There's and is he leaving somebody else off too?
Well, there's just a big discrepancy, right? I mean, Cowser is 38 on one, 40 on another. So I mean, that means Keith Law has him 60. It's not a 10, number swing. It's a 60 number swing,
right.
So
the lowest that Cowser is on any of these other lists is number 41.
Yeah.
And I will give Keith Law credit. He did list Cowser he was the first person in his just missed the cut list. And he's concerned about his performance against lefties. But there are plenty of people on those lists with pretty significant platoon splits that just whatever. Anyway, sorry, Tyler,
sure.
Please continue.
No, I mean, this is kind of what it is. It's sort of an open-end discussion on it. I mean, yeah, it's, that's one thing I will say about these lists is that as far as I understand it, Keith Law is the only, not Keith Law, I'm sure, talks to scouts and front office folks and all that when he's compiling his list. But at the end of the day, it's Keith Law's list versus Baseball America, Prospectus, MLB Pipeline is a combination of a couple people's opinions. So there's some of that. And if Keith Law just doesn't really like something about a prospect, that's his prerogative. And also what I should say is if he's 101st or whatever, if that's how you want to view it, the first guy off versus 40th, there's probably not as huge of a discrepancy there as what we might think between all players and I'm trying to defend Keith Law a little bit.
I just want you to stop being honorable and fair and reasonable in this conversation and instead just dig into it with the rest of O's fans.
You're basically saying they're not big talent distinctions between number 40 and number 100. And I think that's valid.
Tyler is absolutely correct. And Keith Law knows a hell of a lot more about, excuse my mouth, a lot more about prospects than I do. And, has actually spent time watching video of all these guys in ways that I never have. So when I give him a hard time, it is purely that. But that said, Gunnar Henderson is the top prospect in baseball. Corbin Carroll is fast. That's lovely. He's fine.
Well, I think that's the fact that I didn't even know what Carroll's first name was at the beginning is very indicative of my knowledge level to Keith Law's knowledge level. He knows the first name of all the players on the list.
He does. He definitely does.
And then that's the same to be said about Kylie McDaniel at ESPN. He used to be at Fangraphs, but this is his list that, again, I'm sure he consults with people. But, opposed to what Keith Wall's got, where he has a few Orioles not on the list or lower ranked, Kylie McDaniel loves the Orioles. He even has Cade Povich at 54th on his list. Cade Povich is not on any other lists, but 54th, that's one of the pitchers the Orioles got back in the Jorge Lopez deal with the Twins last year. Povich's numbers with the Orioles once he came over weren't all that great. So that's kind of what I'm talking about when you like the secret sauce and the Orioles just know what they're doing. There's something in his numbers that Kylie McDaniel likes, and it's indicative of how the Orioles develop pitching. And that got him up to 54th on a list where I don't even know if he was in sniffing distance of any of the other ones. I don't know, Eli or Jesse, if you guys have any thoughts on that ranking, but that stood out to me.
Yeah, I mean, that was encouraging to me. I also definitely noticed it. He was also the only one who had 9 prospects from the Orioles in his top 100. But yeah, Povich, like, I don't know. We talked about Daryl Hernandez as a guy who had helium. Like Cade Povich was the definition of that. And there was a lot of people coming out pretty much when we made the Jorge Lopez trade that were saying, I know you're not seeing him on lists, but I promise you this guy, is coming up. This guy, his fastball is gained a couple miles an hour. Everything looks better this year. Everything looks better. And to kind of see that validated, at least in one spot, it is definitely encouraging to me. I think Kylie McDaniel does a really great job. I've been reading him since he was over at Fangraphs. So definitely, yeah, I agree with it. Agree with it as something exciting. Not saying I agree with it as in like that's where I'd put Cade Povich.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. It was exciting to me. A little bit of validation from, the pain of losing Jorge. Kind of in the end, it's like, okay, well, maybe it'll mean something.
Yeah.
And the Orioles don't like, Drew Rom, of course, but the Orioles, like the pitchers that we have been graduating, as in Dean Kramer, Kyle Bradish, Tyler Wells was a Rule 5 pick, but these young guys coming up have all been righties, besides the little taste of DL Hall that we got. And so I don't know, it's kind of cool to think about, a couple of DL Hall, Drew Rom, and now Povich, like actually getting some lefties into the rotation. It's nice to think about.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, it's cool. And I think this is, look, the Orioles don't draft many pitchers with high picks anymore, or they haven't under the Elias regime. So this is kind of a way that they are getting pitching talent into the organization and pushing it upwards. And maybe we see more of it. I don't know how many more trades they'll make in the near future where they trade major league talent for minor leaguers, but this is interesting that they continue to do it. Another one that stood out to me was over on MLB Pipeline. Heston Kjerstad came in at 80th overall. Heston Kjerstad had a rough start to his career with the myocarditis, didn't play for over a year, had his first taste of professional baseball last year. It was so, didn't show a ton of power, but was handling himself down in Del Mar. But I guess he'll start maybe in Aberdeen or maybe Bowie this year. I'm not sure, but encouraging that Pipeline sees enough from him to get him back on the top 100, because I don't think he was there at certain points last year. So pretty cool.
Yeah, I think in talking about him, do need to mention the AFL appearance though, because he showed a ton of pop. I don't like a majority of the way through the season. He was leading in home runs. Admittedly, I do not remember if he finished there, but the pop started to come out in the AFL, and granted, it is notoriously hitter friendly, but I don't know, that was encouraging. And yeah, he continued to strike out at a high rate, continued to walk at a high rate, continued to slug at a high rate. So it does seem like that's the kind of guy we've got with him, which was pretty much his billing as he was coming out. But yeah, definitely some validation there too.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one guy I just wanted to comment on that, hasn't been brought up yet too. It's just Jackson Holiday. Like he's in the top 20 on every list. And I mean, I know he was the number one overall pick and, we would expect him to be there and everything, but I mean, that's great. And that's really exciting. And I mean, this is the guy we drafted just like 6 months ago or whatever. Right. And the fact that he's like, I mean, granted, I know we had the number one pick, but the fact that he's in the top 20 on every list here, I mean, is really exciting. So, and he's probably only gonna, work his way up that list. So,
well, and I do think like that's an important player to watch this year because he's part of the middle infield discussion. I mean, I know we just drafted him, but when you're taking number one overall, part of that evaluation is how quick you're going to get up to the big leagues. And I mean, if he tears it up at Aberdeen this year, I see no reason why he won't end the year in Bowie. And if you end the year in Bowie, you're close to the big leagues for sometime in 2024. And if the Orioles think that's a possibility, that makes it even more likely, I think, that they could trade some Westbergs, Ortiz, anybody like that. So yeah, I think that's a good shout, Jesse. And all the scouting reports on him obviously are super complimentary. He's young for the level, looked mature at the plate. So yeah, it's obvious, but yeah, you got to keep an eye on him this year for sure.
You keep hearing the phrase swing decisions, like everywhere up and down the Orioles lineup or up and down the Orioles farm system. And people say, yeah, I mean, he just came in, he walked all the time. He had more walks than games, if I remember right, or something like that. He excelled. And for being the 12-year-old dude that he is, it definitely it's encouraging.
Yeah, absolutely. And then also I think another prospect on the last one I'll mention is just Kobe Mayo. Showed helium last year. These lists are very indicative that he's been good, or that scouts are kind of feeling the same way. He's not on every list. He's on, I think, 2 of them. He's number 69 on Baseball Prospectus's list, and he's 47th on ESPN's. But that's good. That was another, he wasn't a first round pick, but showing good physical skills. And, I think he's going to be a slower one through the system just because he's a little raw still, but, it's kind of a new name on the top 100 list. So that's really exciting too.
Yeah. I got to say, I think that Mayo might be of all of these people that we're talking about. I mean, it's easy to say one of the Westberg, Ortiz, Norbys, because we have so many middle infielders, but I really do think that Mayo is a strong candidate to be traded. I think that Gunnar is going to settle in, and if Gunnar stays at third base, he's a fully capable and potentially plus shortstop. If he stays at third base, it's going to be exactly, I mean, in my mind, it's going to be exactly how it was with Manny. You take a solid to good shortstop, you put him at third, he absolutely excels. Gunnar's got the arm strength over there. Our corner outfield is probably going to be pretty set. And Mayo's a right-handed hitter. He's a right-handed power hitter. That's how he makes his calling. So I see him as somebody that the Orioles, I think he has a high probability of getting traded relative to the rest of the names we're seeing on this list.
I think that is a good shout. I mean, they've talked about moving into corner outfield, like you said, and potentially there's an option there. But again, I think it's these first 3 months of the season are going to be huge on determining a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, because if you think Henderson's the answer at third and you think Colton Cowser's the right field answer, then you're starting to be well, Kobe Mayo is most valuable to us as a trade chip.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's an interesting one for sure. Anything else we want to talk about with the prospects before we quickly go through the ownership stuff recently?
It's fun to be good. That's the only thing.
And we got to soak it up. This is going to be, I think this list might still be pretty good next year, but I think after that, we're going to start to see some regression, but that should coincide with some 95 win seasons in the big league. So it's okay. It's okay. All right, let's talk Orioles ownership because it's a bit of a disaster right now. John Angelos is the son of Peter Angelos. Peter Angelos, along with his wife, Georgia, own like I think 70% of the Orioles. They are the majority owners of the team, but John Angelos is the control person. So he's the one that is the public face of ownership. And he's a bit of a disaster recently. He recently had the press over to Camden Yards for a Martin Luther King Day press conference in which he also announced some scholarship deals along with the city of Baltimore, and got into a bit of a tussle with the Athletics' Dan Connolly. Connolly wanted to ask Angelos about the future of the Orioles and the city of Baltimore, considering the lease at Camden Yards was set to expire. Angelos took exception to being asked a question at a press conference on Martin Luther King Day of all days, and just kind of, made himself look like a jerk pretty much, asked Dan Connolly where he was from. It just didn't come off very well. And he also made a promise to invite the press back sometime the next week and show off the team's finances. Of course, that didn't happen. So that was a bit of a mess him up by John Angelos. Today, news broke that the Orioles are not going to be accepting a one-time 5-year extension to their current lease at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. This means the lease will actually end, or is set to end, on December 31st of this year. However, reports are coming out that the Orioles and the state of Maryland are optimistic that they will get a deal done for the long term by sometime in July. For context, the Ravens just agreed to a 15-year extension with the Maryland Stadium Authority that could run as much as 25 years. And the state of Maryland has also already committed $1.2 billion to upgrades of the Oriole Park, or the Camden Yards sports facilities, which is both Oriole Park and M&T Bank Stadium. So I don't exactly know what the negotiation is here, but clearly Angelos is not happy with how things are. And then finally, the Mass and Money settlement may be coming to an end. There's a court date for March in New York where a judge is going to determine if the Orioles do in fact owe the Nationals $100 million in local TV revenue. The Nationals are currently up for sale, and that sale can't really be finalized or really move forward until this settlement is sorted out. So we got a lot going on with the Orioles ownership. Guys, how are we feeling about the Angelos family and how they're running things? Eli, maybe I'll go to you first.
I don't know. To me, they are rich, entitled jerks. It's not really a surprise to anyone, but yeah, I mean, the way that John Angelos was trying to kind of virtue signal and try to, pull in all the stops that he could in order to just avoid the question of Connolly asking him. He's like, Connolly came to him and he said, so you are doing this, you're, funding this scholarship. That's wonderful. But what are the prospects for you guys staying in Baltimore? Because your family is currently embroiled in this legal battle, internal.
Oh, yeah.
And
I forgot to say that the brother is Lewis is suing John and Georgia.
Exactly.
Forgot about that part.
And so, he was just kind of asking, this is great. You are showing a commitment to the people of Baltimore, but what is the status of the Orioles and you and everything? And John Angelos didn't want to answer that question very simply. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, he started pulling out all this stuff to try to, just try to avoid the question. He didn't really come to anything coherent. Like you said, he was like, Dan, are you from Baltimore? Are you from here? And meanwhile, he lives in Nashville, and Dan Connolly is semi-local, from just up 83. So there's a lot.
He's covered the team for forever.
Right.
He's probably in Baltimore half the nights of the summer. Yeah. Right.
He'd been writing, for the Baltimore Suns probably since Jesse and I were born, before he went to the Athletic. It's all I don't know. It's kind of ridiculous. And then today with them, declining this 5-year extension, it just kind of it comes off as kind of, I don't know. It just comes off as smug and I'm gonna, ignore the ramifications of this and just try to go for leverage and just, try to extend the contract and get a better deal, and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, definitely not particularly happy. And then on top of all this, we talked about not signing Carlos Rodon. If you gave Mike Elias the purse strings to sign Carlos Rodon, I'm sure he would be more than happy to. Yeah. I don't think there's ever been a GM in history who said, you know what? No, I don't want more money. I would like to operate with this smaller payroll. He's definitely handcuffed and constrained by ownership. And we should fault them for that too.
Jesse has a problem.
I just don't know how clear that is. Like, I'm not sure it's that binary, right? It's not, it might not necessarily be that they're completely unwilling to give the money, but with the money comes expectations. And, I think those sorts of things are happening behind the scenes too. So I'm not as, clearly convinced that, Elias is being constrained and he's not allowed to spend any money. And I'm not sure that's exactly happening. My only sort of take on this, that is sort of disappointing, I gotta say, is, like growing up, I mean, I remember, despite Angelos not running the Orioles effectively, my dad sort of liked, that Angelos ran the team and had the team because of it, his experience with labor in the past. Like, especially as a lawyer, he participated in class action lawsuits, like representing workers and stuff like that. So, right. It's disappointing that, I guess his children sort of act in this way. And,
right. I was going to say that was Peter's, not John,
Well, because
that was his dad. Right.
It's a local family. Like, it's Baltimore. Whereas you sell it to a billionaire, there's no guarantee that it's going to be a Baltimore family.
Of course not.
It's very rare. The Orioles and Ravens both have local ownership, and that is not usually the case. So,
yeah.
I don't know. It's frustrating. It reeks of like overthink and a rich guy thinking that he can just sort things out because he's smarter and better than you because he went to Duke Law School or whatever it is that John Angelos did. It's just like, I don't know. Sometimes you just keep it simple. Like the Ravens figured out a way to get this extension done, and all the money seems to be the same. It's 50-50, 600 mil here, 600 mil there. The Orioles got reduction on their rent because they made the changes to the wall in left field last year. I mean, the stadium is universally regarded as like a top 5 stadium in the sport. Like, what are you haggling about? We already know you kind of are going to sell the team. Lock up the stadium for 15 to 25 years. That seems like a big checkbox to figure out. Sort out the Masson money. Like, yeah, it's a screwed up situation that you are in there, but like, figure it out. Like, it's just kind of embarrassing too. Like, you're a lawyer. The whole family is law. Now, granted, it's not contractual law. It's different kinds of stuff. But
I'm sure they know a contractual lawyer.
Like, it's just like it's just embarrassing that the situation is this way. And it also is annoying as a fan because you get the fan base going at each other for no real reason. You've got the people that are convinced that, oh, well, this means the team's moving to Nashville. This means that the team's, that Oriole Park's going to be vacant. I was on Reddit last night, which you never should do, but I was on Reddit and I was in the Nationals subreddit, and they were talking about the Orioles ownership situation and like, yeah, this means they're going to be moving, and maybe the Nationals could play some games at Camden Yards occasionally. Like, that would be kind of cool. And I was like losing my mind because that's not going to happen. The Orioles are going to be in Baltimore, but I just need that line of like thinking and conversation to just be over because I'm so over it. It's so exhausting, and I just need John Angelos to sort things out because this should be such a fun, exciting time to be an Orioles fan, but this backdrop makes it not that way. And it's upsetting.
The other probably smaller point in all of this that you did bring up is this thing about the finances and then not showing the finances. Like, why would you agree to that if you had no intention? It's just like unnecessarily shooting yourself in the foot. And like, obviously people are going to be like upset and be like, why would you do that? I mean,
it was so much better than that though, because it was totally unprompted.
Right.
He was going on this rant and he just goes, I'll bring you and anybody else into the warehouse next week, and I will show you all of the Orioles finances, and it's like,
yeah,
all right, do it.
Well, it's like, so it's kind of funny because like we are so beaten down that we don't expect that. Although like I got into a whole fight in the Camden chat, a comment section recently about, like, I said something about, the Orioles, we do deserve to know how the Orioles are like spending their money. This was before John Angelos said anything like this, but I was like, we do deserve to know like what John Angelos is spending the money on, where the revenues are going. And some guys like, where do you get off asking like a private business for their finances? And I'm like, sorry, when they want millions of dollars in tax revenue, I do get off asking where they're spending the money.
Right.
But we're so beaten down as like a people that we don't expect this. I think the Atlanta Braves are the only team that like is open about their finances in certain ways. No other team is, and it's ludicrous that they're not. But it was such an unforced error.
There's one more that's publicly traded. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's fine. I knew it was very few though. But like none of the I'm sure as soon as he said this, Rob Manfred or whatever, one of the owners probably called him and was like, what in the hell are you doing?
Why would you say that? Right.
Like, we don't want them to know this stuff. It's like, shut up. Like, I know you're not very smart and your dad had all the brains and was the one that got the money for your family and got the baseball team. And just because you're the control person, you think you're as smart as your dad is, but you're not. So like, stop running your mouth. I'm sure that's a phone call he was given because rich people run things like the mob just a little bit, I believe. So
for sure.
I don't know. It's disheartening, but it also doesn't change like anything that's going on. The Orioles aren't going anywhere. I keep seeing people like, oh, when should we get worried? You should get worried as soon as there is another MLB worthy stadium in a major city in the United States that doesn't currently have a baseball team, which is no cities. So the Orioles are going to be in Baltimore. I just wish it wasn't so frustratingly slow and painful in the way they are making that happen. But it's been quite a 2 weeks for the Orioles ownership team.
Agreed.
Anything else we want to talk about before we get out of here?
I can just say I looked it up. The other publicly traded team is the Blue Jays, but they're publicly traded in Canada.
Okay.
So.
Thank you. I didn't know that. I mean, I knew they were in Canada. I did know that much.
That's good.
I was just going to add that, there is still time for Mike Elias if he wants to bump up his grade. There is still time before the semester ends.
Do some extra credit.
We will. Yeah, exactly. We will reconsider our grades that we've assigned him for the offseason if, he turns something in late and makes a big splash these upcoming few weeks.
In all seriousness, if Adley or Gunnar get extended, it's an easy 86 for me.
Yeah,
not even an A, but
a letter grade.
No, it's still not an A because you still have the resources to sign Carlos Rodon.
And they didn't actually like put anyone on the team like more for this upcoming year, right?
I think that's fair.
The big signing was a guy we had, Yeah.
Well, if anything major does happen, we will try to get together for a pod. We still have almost 2 months until opening day, but we will do a couple episodes in the interim. We'll probably do sort of a big season preview at some point. We're also planning to record our 100th episode sometime. We're currently on I think this episode you're listening to is 102.
We're fudging the numbers a little bit for this 100th episode.
Well, it's not, and it's not even going to be crazy. I think we just want to make it a little bit different, a little bit more personal. It's like our experience with the Orioles, so not as topical. So we'll get that recorded here in the next couple of weeks and get it out before opening day. That is our pledge to you. But yeah, so keep an eye out for that stuff coming up. If you want to follow us, go on Twitter at The Warehouse Pod. You can also follow me at _Ty Young on Twitter, and Eli, you're at Elijah Ginsburg on Twitter. Jesse, you never check Twitter, so don't worry about it. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere else you get your podcast. If you go to our Substack, thewarehousepod.substack.com, you can subscribe to us via email and we'll get emailed to you. We'll also occasionally put out some blogs and stuff if we want to, or if we're feeling fancy. And you can also email the podcast if you want, thewarehousepod@gmail.com. The inbox is currently a disaster of spam that we have to sort out. I don't know what happened.
So this is the greatest thing. we have two names. I don't know how we got them, but all of this spam is either sending it to Florence or sending it to Alexis.
Okay.
As far as I know,
our two listeners.
None of us on the pod are named either of those things.
I guess he like reads the spam, you know.
Well, I get notifications. You know, I got Gmail on my phone. It's as simple as that. I don't
know what happened. One of us signed up for something illegal, and now we just are flooded.
Jesse did it.
Yeah, I bet that sounds about right. But yeah, do all those things to follow along, and also, like we mentioned at the top, go check out, give that fan a podcast. The Family Feud style game show is still going on, and they also cover Orioles news during the season as well. So check them out as well. The last thing I was going to say is go to our YouTube channel. We've got a YouTube channel, trying to grow that this year. If we could get a subscription there, we also post the podcast there. So check us out there. Just search the Warehouse Podcast on YouTube. I think that's all we got, boys. Thanks so much for joining us. Until next time, this has been the Warehouse Podcast. I'm Tyler.
I'm Jesse.
And I'm Eli.
We'll talk to you later.